Hello my friends, this is Mike with Mike's Wilderness. Welcome to my channel, and yeah, today is a beautiful day. Probably about 55 degrees and partly cloudy, partly sunny, and I've spent a little time out here in the woods, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to challenge myself to just make a video straight up of every wild edible that I can find, whether it's in season or out. And so that is my intention, is to play a game of identifying wild edibles either before they are in season or in season, and whether you can eat them or not, to help me learn these things along the way. Although I'm not taking the books with me, I have one here that is by Samuel Thayer. It's one that just about everybody picks up at some point in their ventures to learn wild edibles, and that is Nature's Garden, Edible Wild Plants, Identifying, Harvesting, and Preparing. And another all-time favorite of mine, at least here in Minnesota, is this one on Wild Berries and Fruits, Field Guide by Teresa Maroney. And this is for Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And really enjoy these two books. A lot to learn in going through their pages. Makes for some really interesting reading to learn all about these things. So that's the challenge for today. Excuse me if I go through some of these wild edibles that I have introduced in the past, but I'd just like to see what I could get done today. So we're in the park to do this, and here's my introduction, and I welcome you to come along on the journey. Not going to be harvesting anything, just going to try to identify a ton of edibles with short little video clips. All right, let's get to it. First very obvious wild edible right off the bat, both for its greens and its flowers and its root, are the common dandelion. And it's very much on the list of wild edibles, especially for those who need a substitute for coffee. You can process the root into a coffee ground that is supposed to be, I guess, fairly good. Dandelion wine. There's all kinds of products that you can make from the dandelion. Another wild edible that we have within reach here of the dandelions is red raspberry. These are beginning to push out little buds that will become blossoms, which will then become the berries themselves, and there is a lot of the raspberry in the park. And that's always kind of fun to harvest as a trail snack when you're hiking. Another wild berry that we have growing amongst the raspberries here is the gooseberry, and there are a couple of different types in the park. And these have got little buds, flower buds that will eventually begin to grow the berries themselves. If you look closely at those, you can see they're starting to form already. And yeah, the gooseberry, another common edible. Here again, kind of a repeat from a trip I took the other day, but this is the wild crab apple, another edible in the park, and very beautiful blossoms. The blossoms themselves make a good addition to any salad, and then the apples that come out later on, of course, make for a good edible as well. Wild crab apple. Here we have a very small patch of wild strawberries. When I came by these a few days ago, they did have some flowers. Looks like the flowers have kind of receded, but yeah, I have a small patch of wild strawberries. Be interesting to come back and see if these push out any fruits. Another wild edible here in the park is the smooth Solomon seal, and you can usually tell it from the false Solomon seal by the way the leaf attaches to the stem. The base of the leaf tends to want to wrap itself around the stem, and the false Solomon seal the leaves tend to stand off and away from the stem. And, we have both in the park, but the one that I'm interested in, the roots, the rhizomes, is the smooth Solomon seal, and that's this plant right here. A lot of them in the park. Smooth Solomon seal leaf attachment. Right up tight to the stem. Another nice wild edible here in the park is the basswood leaves. This again, another repeat from the other day, but yeah, makes a good salad green. It's really quite nice, especially the little brassy colored kind of greenish new sprouts of leaves. The linden tree, American linden tree or basswood tree. Great edible. Here's yet another wild edible in the park, and we are going to have a lot of them in this area, and that is wood nettle, or the stinging nettle. They both grow in this area, and yeah, the leaves kind of taste like spinach to me, I guess, but there you go, stinging nettle or wood nettle. Here's yet another beautiful edible, this time a fungus, and it is called Dryad saddle or pheasant back mushroom. And yeah, a nice bit of it. The window of opportunity for harvesting this and eating it is quite short, but it does continue to grow out in spurts depending on the weather, and I really like it in salads and sauteed and in soups and things. So there you go, the Dryad saddle. Very nice edible fungus. Here again is another edible, I guess a repeat from the other day, and that is the common burdock, the roots of which I think taste like carrot, but makes for a very good pot herb or soup stock component. Just harvesting the root, and yes, burdock. You can use the large leaves even to cook things in as well. So if you wanted to steam some fish or something, not a bad way to go. Again, another repeat from the other day, and that is garlic mustard. Another nice edible. Although the park management would like to see all of this eradicated, so I will probably have to tell the park naturalist where I found it. But as of right now, that's a nice little plant. Good for an edible. Although not real obvious from looking out at this marshland, it is really chock full of cattails, which is a very good wild edible nearly year-round. And here's some of the early spring growth, the roots of which could be harvested and roasted right now. Some of the stalks could also be cut and eaten right now. And yeah, very good wild edible to know and understand and have kind of in the back of your mind no matter where you are. The cattails grow all over the world. I had to mention it or I'd have been a bit remiss for doing so. Alright, moving on. Although very long past season, here are the berry stalks left over on the smooth sumac that we have in the park. There's also staghorn sumac, and in the fall they're really great to harvest the berries and make a nice kind of a sour nectar out of it with high in vitamin C. But yeah, I consider it a wild edible, although it's probably closer to a beverage than a eatable green. We have an abundance of white and red oak trees in the park, and I would be probably remiss if I did not mention acorns as another wild edible. Here's a collection of several nuts that have been opened and eaten by other little creatures, along with the deer and such, but they can be processed and used as human consumption as well. And so I'm going to count it as an edible. So acorns from the white oak or the red oak. And here we have Canadian thistle. And that's got kind of spiky leaves. This is first year growth, and it's going to push up a stalk that's going to have some tender eating, and it'll harvest and taste a bit like celery. It's got a lot of water content in it, so it's a good survival food as well. But I like making a thistle soup. It's kind of a nice one. I'll see if I can get a picture of one of the past season stalks for you. Very thorny thistle. Using the thick of your thumb. Although there are better examples of this. This is a wild rose bush. You can see the thorns, and it's just starting to leaf out. And eventually, of course, it would have rose apples on it, or rose hips, and those are edible. But this one's rather immature, and it's going to take a little while for it to leaf out and produce fruits. But just had to add it to the collection of wild edibles. The wild rose. Without the thorns, what is that saying? A rose by any other name? Although I guess considered more of a beverage than an edible or flavoring for tea. These are wintered over bergamot blossoms, and yeah, you can harvest those and add at least a nice beverage to your meal. So I'm going to include that in here as an edible, because it does have a little bit of chemistry to it that can medicinally help you, as well as some nutritional values. But okay, that's just one more for the list. Here's yet another edible in the park, and that is wild grape. The leaves themselves are edible, as well as the berries when they ripen up, although this year I'm not certain if we're going to get a crop of wild grapes or not. They were quite plentiful last year, and we may just not get much this year. They tend to grow on and off odd years or even years or whatever. But wild grapes starting to bud out, although looking rather poorly at the moment. This is plantain. It's right out here on the path and has been trampled on quite a bit, but not that it's a real good edible. It's more of a pot herb that imparts kind of a mushroom flavor, and it can be eaten, but I don't prefer it to using actual wild mushrooms. But another one to consider, greater plantain. Well, here you can see leafing out on a black walnut tree, and it does produce wild edibles. I have the example of one right here. It's actually the husk of a black walnut, and I just wanted to add that to the count. Very difficult to find a lot of these remnants now this time of year, but yeah, I couldn't leave the park without having one more added to the list. The black walnut. Well, there you have it, my friends. One big loop out and back, and tried to find about as many wild edibles as would come to mind. Lessons learned, I guess, is it's good to learn to identify things even in the very earliest stages of the season and practice identifying your wild edibles year long, so you know when they're coming into season and going out of season. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I challenge any of you, my friends, when you get out to do some dirt time, maybe throw together a video with a similar kind of a contest for yourself and see what you can come up with just on the fly. And it doesn't have to be anything special, but anyway, that's it. I'm going to call it a day. It was some good dirt time, and I'll be curious to see how many I can count up after all of this. One of the things I know for certain is there's, oh golly, maybe even a dozen or more that came to mind that I couldn't find and I know are out there someplace. So anyway, with that, take care. Catch you the next time. Stay safe, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. Here's a list of the ones I couldn't find.